Hey nerds! Welcome to the little lore project of Where the Streetlights End, where I tell you a little bit about whatever monster I think is cool this week, whether it be from folklore, from film, or in human form. Like, comment, or subscribe for more horror, history, and lore from me. Yours truly, myself. Today I'll be giving you an overview of one of the quintessential spooky things from European folklore, and one which has remained popular since possibly prehistory, the Banshee. One night, long ago, a young man was walking home from a gathering of friends. The night was dark, but warm as he wound his way down the path. He had been surrounded by folks for many hours, and there was a ringing in his ears from the laughter and chatting that had seen him off from the party. The walk would be a short one, and he knew his path very well, having traveled it many times. Therefore, he had no concerns with walking it alone late at night. Eventually, however, perhaps about halfway to his destination, a chill filled the air. Suddenly, he began to shiver, and he could see the clouds of breath drift from his mouth as he quickened his pace. The ringing in his ears was replaced with a light howling, which seemed to come from the wind. But it couldn't be the wind, could it? The trees were not swaying, the leaves hung limp and unmoving above him. His clouds of breath lingered in place while he passed through them. Yet the howling sound grew louder and louder. The man felt eyes upon him, like you do when someone across the room is watching your movements from behind. He paused to look around and determine if there were a source for this eerie feeling, but he could see no one else around. He continued his journey home, but the feeling of being watched would not go away. Then, suddenly, he saw her. A woman standing still just off the road ahead. The howling of the wind grew sharp, and his ears were filled with a piercing scream. As he looked at this woman, she appeared to be a tall shadow, aside from the reflection of the spring moon on her light dress. The sound of the howling was so intense that he covered his ears and began to run as fast as he could toward his home, passing the woman along the way. The shrieking in his ears continued, and no matter how hard he pressed his hands against his head, the sound would not be muffled. As he approached his house, he saw the woman again, standing on the porch, just out of the lamplight's reach. Too afraid to stop and see who she was or what she wanted, he crashed through the door and locked it behind him. The screaming grew softer, but continued through the night. As he lay in his bed, the cries from outside his window kept him from falling asleep, until they turned into the sound of weeping. The young man did eventually manage to fall asleep when the sounds from outside had softened. He awoke in the morning to a knock on the door. His brother had come to give him the terrible news that their mother had passed away in the night. Within almost any culture, there have existed stories that depict beings which exist to warn us of coming tragedies. Some entities serve the important but often terrifying purpose of coming to us to let us know that we are soon to pass on from this world, and our time on Earth has come to an end. Other times, these omens, as they are called, appear to tell us that someone else is due to meet their end. These beings have been cited before major disasters and instances of mass death such as powerful earthquakes, terror attacks, or plagues. Among the most well-known of these creatures today is originally from the old stories in Ireland, but has been depicted in popular culture repeatedly, and its name is often used in casual simile, the Banshee. The original Irish name for the Banshee, which I would surely mispronounce, is said to translate roughly to woman of the fairy mound, or fairy woman, although I've seen sources claim that she is named based on the Irish word which means woman who cries out. Unless I have Irish viewers who can let me know, this may be one of those cases where I don't get a satisfying answer on the origins of the name. Either way, it would make sense if the name referenced fairies. Fairies are a big deal in folklore from that region, and I'm sure we'll dig deeply into them someday, but for now, suffice to say that the majority of ethereal entities from the area are in some way tied to the Fae or to the Fae world. Banshees are no exception to this. Many people who are only slightly familiar with her tend to assume that the Banshee is a type of ghost, and this may have some truth to it. Some of the lore claims that she is the spirit of a woman who was murdered violently, and who now roams the earth to warn people when others are about to meet a similar fate. However, the majority of the sources that I have found provide a great deal more evidence to the idea that the Banshee is a type of fey creature. Fairies do not haunt, and were never a living human. If the Banshee were the soul of an individual woman who met a terrible end, it would contradict the tales of many Banshees gathering together. Perhaps, if we are to give this story, this theory of the story, the benefit of being possible, it could be that many women who die violently do become Banshees, and therefore there are many of them, all who suffered a similar demise and decided to work together. Aside from being absolutely terrifying, she does not actively do any harm to the people who encounter her. The physical description of the Banshee does vary, as is the case with most beings from folk tales, but she is always described as a woman, or rather a feminine being. Woman implies human, I suppose. Some have stated that she is unnaturally tall, perhaps with her image distorted by the spooky surroundings in which she appears, the light of the moon or the haze of the spiritual energy that permeates from her, because far more often she has been recorded as being very small, standing somewhere between 1 and 4 feet tall. The Banshee are, like I said, a type of fairy, so she is not one individual entity. This means that perhaps they all look a little bit different, just like people do. Sometimes the Banshee appears as a beautiful young woman with flowing hair. Other times she appears to be very old and her hair is ratty and gray. One thing that these creatures all have in common, aside from the work that they do, is their distinctive voice. You may have heard the phrase, screaming like a banshee. This phrase is referring to the terrible, shrieking scream that the Banshee belts out. What better way to get the attention of the person you hope to warn than to scream at them in a voice so raw and terrible that you cannot be ignored? It is said that her voice can be so piercing that it will shatter glass, bursting windows and dishes in people's homes. Although she is most well known for her harsh screams, some have said that they hear her crying mournfully instead. Perhaps her calls are quieter or more intense depending on how soon the tragedy will occur. As the impending death grows sooner, it may be necessary that her warnings become more intense. Or she gives up hope that anyone will stop it, and so she turns to weeping instead. Who knows? Although it is perfectly frightening enough to come across a Banshee who is foretelling your death or the death of a loved one, there have also been accounts of people seeing large groups of the Fae, like I mentioned earlier. It is said that when many Banshees come together, it is because they have foretold the death of someone who is very powerful or holy, or the death of many people. They are said to have been a common sight on battlefields. Some legends describe her as not only a friend who has come to give family members the bad news, or to warn people so that they can prepare for a tragedy, but a companion on people's journeys to the underworld. There are myths from Ireland that state she will help to guide and escort those who have died as they make their way to their new domain, wherever that may be. Many sources state that according to the tales told at the local levels in Ireland, certain family lines are more closely connected to the Banshee. There are families which are said to hear her calls more clearly, or to be visited by her consistently when there is a death among them, while she appears less often to others. This is a very interesting aspect of the Banshee's story, and it's not one that comes up with many other creatures that I study. Some sources state that a Banshee was essentially tied to each noble family in Ireland way back in the day, and it would be the same Banshee who would appear to all members of the bloodline and continue to do so for all of the descendants forever. It seems that the nobility and high status of these families meant that it was supernaturally important that they receive these warnings of impending death. However, the Banshee associated with the family would remain faithful to all descendants, regardless of their social or economic status. It is possible that if you are of Irish descent and you encounter a Banshee, somewhere far back in your ancestry there may be links to one of those old noble families. I wonder how often banshees appear to individuals who have no connection to the families, if this part of the lore is accurate. I wonder if the noble families each once had a powerful practitioner who contacted the Fae and intentionally created the bond between them and the family, or if the connection was a freely made choice by the banshees. It sounds a lot like a deal with the Fae to me, and we know how things like that go. If you don't know how deals with the Fae go, I will simply state that they tend to go awry. The Fae are famously fickle and literal in their communication. Whatever the reason for the enduring presence of the Banshee in our world and in our stories, she is certainly someone you don't want to run into in the night. She could be a warning that your time is up, or that you'll have to say goodbye to someone you care about. We all wish she would share this news a little bit more gently, but what can you expect from one of the most prevalent ethereal entities of all time? I think she gets to do as she pleases. If you've enjoyed what I've done here, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I do these short videos as often as I can, and I intersperse big, long, academically researched video essays about more complicated subjects. Drop a comment if you have any questions, concerns, nice or mean things to say, and I hope you stick around for more horror, history, and folklore from me. You can also join my Patreon for behind-the-scenes content, personal updates, photo dumps, and prizes. Oh my god, my voice. My mouth is not doing what my brain tells my mouth to do. I guess that's the end of the video then, isn't it? Join my Patreon for behind-the-scenes content, personal updates, photo dumps, and prizes. This has been Little Lore with myself at Where the Streetlights End. Later, nerd.